Since 1934, Iowa's farmers have turned to the Iowa Farm Bureau spokesman as their trusted news source. Now, the Spokesman Speaks. Listen in and hear from leading experts on topics important to farmers and agriculture. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our July 21st edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler. Today's episode features water quality discussions with Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Mike Naig and Iowa State University researcher Dr. Mike Castellano. Regular listeners of this podcast know that conservation and water quality are topics that we've covered extensively over the years, and it's especially relevant to return to these subjects now that Iowa's water quality is back in the news. Let's start with Secretary Mike Naig, who sat down with spokesman reporter Corey Munson last week.
Secretary Naig, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to talk with us about water quality today. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Always great to catch up with you guys.
Obviously, water quality, especially in the Des Moines metro, has kind of been all the buzz this summer. It's what a lot of folks are talking about. And I want to get into some specifics here in a few minutes. We know that there has been a lot of conservation progress made in the state that doesn't necessarily grab headlines out there. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the major accomplishments you've seen from your vantage point in the last few years?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're building our work around conservation on a long history. Really, conservation gets started in the country coming out of the Dust Bowl era. You move into the last century. NRCS has been around now, the USDA component of conservation, for 90 plus years. And so there's been a long effort. The state of Iowa gets into funding conservation work directly with state appropriations and dollars back in the 70s. And really that was focused on preventing soil erosion. Soil is our most important natural resource in the state of Iowa. It makes us the productive place that we are. And even many years ago, a recognition that we've got to take care of that soil if we want to be productive into the future. Fast forward then, we start to think more about the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of America and what happens in the Mississippi River Basin. And that resulted in states across the region developing their own nutrient reduction strategies. And this is bipartisan, by the way. Democrat and Republican administrations federally have said this too, which is that state-led, non-regulatory approaches are the best way to see change. But it also recognizes that just like we will say that every farm in Iowa is different, of course it's true that every state is different resource needs, different ability to respond, all those pieces. And so what it does is it says, hey, each state needs to lead their own charge when it comes to that. So we implement the nutrient reduction strategy back in 2013. And we really are rolling forward now with both a two-pronged approach of preventing soil erosion like we've historically done with terraces and all those traditional practices, but also bringing on a whole new group of practices, bioreactors, saturated buffers, nitrate-reducing wetlands, really bringing cover crops on, really focusing on conservation tillage, all those different pieces. And nutrient management becomes even more and more important now. And so now we've started to talk more about its soil erosion prevention and water quality work, which is to say we want to reduce the amount of nutrient loss. And so we've seen a dramatic increase in adoption of practices, gone from a few thousand acres of cover crops just before the strategy to 4 million acres today. That's a great trajectory. We need more. I mean, we're leading the nation when it comes to implementation of these practices. And so you can kind of go right across the line and say there's really notable advancements in the number of practices that we've implemented. And then you turn the page and say, and we've got so much more that we can do and will do and need to do. And that's really the mentality that we have. A lot of work's been accomplished. We got a long way to go.
Can you point to a specific example in central Iowa of a project that you've seen firsthand?
We're talking a lot about the Des Moines area, the Central Iowa Water Works. Actually, I'm really proud that we have been able to develop some tremendous partnerships with Polk County, with the surrounding counties, with the city of Des Moines. We're also looking upstream, looking up into the watershed above Des Moines and working in some other counties and trying to get some more edge of field practices like bioreactors, saturated buffers, oxbows, wetlands, These are critically important edge of field infrastructure. They are really focused on reducing nitrates, leaving our landscape and entering our lakes, rivers, and streams. And so to work upstream in a collaborative fashion is a great thing. We just launched kind of a second phase of a project in Beaver Creek watershed, which is one of those tributaries that comes right into the Des Moines area. And here again, we're working upstream in several counties, Greene, Boone, up that direction. That's resulting in a concerted effort of not just the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship going out and trying to implement practices and cite these and design these practices, but that our partners are as well. And we can get even more done when we do that. So I'm actually really proud of that collaborative work that we've done together, and we want to see more of that.
When you kind of hint at this, but it seems to me that a lot of this progress has been accomplished through voluntary actions by our farmers, not necessarily mandates coming from state or federal partners. Why is that important to keep those relationships as a voluntary effort?
That word is key, relationship. From the beginning of conservation work, again, the creation of what is now the NRCS at USDA, the concept is working with producers, working with landowners, providing technical assistance and financial assistance through cost share to get practices done, as opposed to saying, thou shalt do X, or, somebody in Washington or Des Moines saying, I know best, we know best on your farm what makes sense. And so what we truly believe, and not just believe it here, I think you're seeing this across the country. Again, previous administrations, Republican and Democrat, have said a regulatory approach where you go out and turn partners in conservation, people who work collaboratively with farmers and landowners and cities, and you turn them into regulatory function where somebody's inspecting your farm, you lose the collaboration. Frankly, you lose the innovation, all the drive for innovation, all the stewardship ethic, all the concept of we're put here, I believe, to leave things better than we found them. You lose that. You break that trust. You break that relationship. I don't believe that you can see the lasting change that you want to see. You want to see conservation stay on the landscape. You want to see conservation become part of a farm family's ethic. We see these traditions handed down from generation to generation. You take a regulatory approach to that, you lose that, you break that trust, and I think you're worse off in the end.
The nutrient reduction strategy in Iowa was founded in 2013, and it's been held up as an example of how much can be accomplished through these relationships.
Yes.
You want to talk a little bit about that program, its success, and maybe just muse on the NRS a little bit.
Yeah, so we get down the road a little bit and then we say, well, gosh, how did we get here? And I think it is important to go back and say, we're not the only state that's doing this, all across the Mississippi River Basin. And by the way, I should mention that the Hypoxia Task Force, made up of the states are represented across that region, and the federal family, the EPA, the USDA, the Department of Interior, that group is the other half of the Hypoxia Task Force. But part of that whole concept of we need to shrink the size of the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico and reduce nutrient loss throughout the entire basin was again predicated on the idea that each state should have a nutrient reduction strategy. Iowa did something that really is a model, and others have modeled it, which is to say that we started with a scientific assessment. We went to Iowa State University, a key partner in this effort, and we did a science assessment. And what that said is this practice has a corresponding nutrient reduction. If you plant an acre to cover crops, it has on average, a 30% reduction in the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen leaving that acre of land. The science tells us that. And we go right down through the list of practices, and each one has a corresponding nutrient reduction. Now, why is that so important? Well, if I'm going to turn around and go to the legislature and say, I'm going to ask for taxpayer money, taxpayer resources to go implement practices, it is very reasonable that folks should expect that if you put $1 into a practice, it has a corresponding reduction. In that way, we're being efficient and we're being good stewards of public dollars. But it also shows us that there is science behind what we're doing. And I think that was one of the key elements. The other piece that we will always hang our hat on, and kudos to the people who came before. These are people like Bill Northey, Chuck Gipp, Dr. Wendy Winterstein, now President Winterstein, who were true leaders at the time, saying, this can't just be a farm nutrient reduction strategy. It needs to be an Iowa nutrient reduction strategy, meaning it has to deal with both point sources and non-point sources, urban and rural, all of the above. And in that way, again, I think we're unique is that we didn't want to leave anybody out. And we certainly didn't want to create a scenario where one side could point fingers at the other and say, well, it's all your fault. And really, it had to be a holistic approach. So everything from wastewater and stormwater to the non-point ag landscape, all of that has to be included, and it is. And so I think Iowa's strategy really has been, and others have said it too, is a model that many have used to then inform their approaches in their states.
One of the numbers that we enjoy holding up as a proof that the NRS has been successful is we've seen a 33% reduction in phosphorus loss off of our fields, which is huge.
Well, so then people rightly, I don't mind this question at all, which is to say, well, how do you know that you can be successful? We're 33% down on phosphorus. Why is that? Because we've had a sustained focus that we've continued to fund, and folks have gotten used to, and the learning curve. We accomplished that. We attacked that and said, folks learned about it and how to get these practices on the ground. Now we need to do the same thing with the practices that are nitrate reducing. And if you sustain that focus, and if you fund it, and if you bring the partners to it, I believe that you can accomplish the same thing on the nitrate side, and the evidence is that we have done that on the phosphorus side.
If you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about the evidence for this stuff. Is there ongoing monitoring and validation underway to prove that the numbers, that samples are showing that these things are actually effective?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have had a long commitment to monitoring, measuring, because it's reasonable to say, well, you're investing this, you've got a strategy, what's it accomplishing? And so what we wanted to do, and we have used a logic model approach to this, which is if you want to see change in the water, you have to see change on the land, meaning you either change management practices or implement practices. If you want to see change in the land, you've got to see change in people's attitudes and awareness. And if you want to see change in people's attitudes and awareness, then you need to invest in all kinds of inputs to make that happen. And we measure in all four of those categories, and in each one we can see advancement. So it's not good enough. It doesn't tell the full story to just go down to a river every so often and dip water and then sample what's there. It is informative and it's important, and we do that. But we also want to measure right at the practice as well. So we can monitor a wetland, for instance. We have monitored edge of field practices like bioreactors and saturated buffers. And the other, I think, major accomplishment that's been launched this year is a new tool that, again, comes from the actual sampling in field and measurements, and that's the NFACT tool that Iowa State University Extension launched, which is a tool that is based on actual studies done in fields of different rates of fertilizer. And what you're trying to do is make a recommendation for the optimized fertilizer rate for a particular farm. That's a new tool that it's based on measuring and sampling and in-field work that's being done.
Iowa has a lot to be proud of as far as our field practices and what we have in place, not just cover crops, but also field terracing to slow down that water. We've got conservation tillage. We're considered number one in the nation in these areas: grassed waterways, buffer strips, water quality wetlands, like you mentioned before, bioreactors, and saturated buffers. These are all places that there are more of them in our fields than anywhere else in the country. So I think that's something that, we should be very proud of, and our farmers need to be commended for that.
They do. None of that was easy. And it takes people, I always say, look, sometimes it's hard to say yes, and it's hard to make a change. But we see thousands of people. I mean, oh my gosh, I think we've had 1,000 new cover crop users every year for the last 10 years or something like that. And I keep thinking, when are we going to run out of those folks? Well, you know what? We haven't. Which tells me that even now, even today, even this year, as we're going into cover crop cost share sign up season, we still see that many new users. And that's just one example of folks that are still arriving saying, I'm interested in doing something. Now, we also need to make sure that as good as all that is, we've gone from building a couple of wetlands per year to building, we want to do 30 a year. That's what we're pushing for. Now, there's all kinds of challenges around that, getting the engineers to do it. Frankly, some permitting issues that we've got that we're working with the DNR and the Army Corps of Engineers, trying to figure out a way to streamline this. That's a bit of a barrier for us right now, but we're going to push through those things. When you're number one in those categories, it also means you're going to bounce into some barriers at times, and then it's incumbent upon us to push through those and to gain efficiencies, to do things cheaper, to go faster.
Well, and obviously, when you talk about overcoming these regulatory stuff, one of the big things that IDALS has been offering is the batch and build program, which is trying to, do multiple wetland projects at the same time to reduce costs and to increase efficiencies. Can you describe that to us?
Yeah, this whole topic, you can just slap innovative across that whole thing and say it's innovative from top to bottom. And here's what I mean. The nutrient reduction strategy is we're in our 13th year of implementing it, or 12 years in. those practices weren't even mentioned in the first iteration of the strategy because they didn't exist yet. They were literally designed by Iowa State researchers after that. We created the practice. Yeah. And what you're doing, again, is intercepting tile lines with that either wood chip pit or saturated buffers are fantastic because you run laterals that are really just more tile that's running laterally along a stream, and it seeps into the stream and it denitrifies along the way. They are fantastic practices. And what we started to do, of course, was to build them one at a time, which is really inefficient because you go out, you'd hit one or two tile lines and then you move on, and the next, this contractor is deploying the equipment. And it was a good way to start because we needed to gain the experience, but we've quickly figured out that while the practice is innovative, it's not a really very effective way or a very efficient way to get them done because they're so spread out. So the concept then became, how do you batch these together? How do you really go in and look at a small watershed, a series of these practices together, group landowners together? And here's the great thing I always say, not that conservation's ever easy, but it is really easy for a farmer or a landowner to say, yeah, I want into that group. And then we say, great, we'll get you in, we'll look at your tile lines, we'll let you know. And you don't have to hire a contractor, you don't have to do the work. The work is all done for you. You simply say yes. And then we group together 20, 30, 50 of these practices, put them out for bid, get one contractor. It's very efficient. It's good work for them, and we can move faster. And of course, what you'd like is you're targeting a specific watershed, which means you're getting a higher adoption rate in a particular area, which then has a corresponding effect on water. So that was an innovative approach, never been done before. And frankly, now we're looking and saying, well, what else could we do by grouping together? How else might we gain efficiencies and contract and do so in a way that can drive cost out of these practices? And so these are really innovative things that have only happened in the last couple of years.
Well, that's very exciting to see those accomplished. You and I, rightfully so, spend a lot of our time focused on rural areas and stuff going on out in the country. I want to spend a few minutes talking about some of our urban areas. So I know your department in Des Moines and other metros have funded stormwater and edge of stream practices, stormwater retention practices in the city. So why is it important to address water quality from both the urban and rural settings? And is that a roadmap, what you're doing now, to kind of a whole region approach to this issue?
Yeah, so again, this ties back to the whole concept of when the strategy was developed. We said it had to be point and non-point. It had to be urban and rural. It had to be the entire Iowa landscape, and that, of course, includes cities. And we need to make sure that we're addressing all of those things holistically. Look, there's been a lot of work done on the wastewater management side, too. I don't want to leave that out. It's outside of my lane because it's over in the DNR's lane, but there's been a tremendous amount of work to improve or reduce nutrient loss through those systems as well. Look, we have an effect as people on the watershed as well, and so they deserve credit for what's been done there. But another component to this is stormwater. You think of all the impervious surfaces, the roofs, driveways, streets, parking lots, things rainwater hits and runs very quickly. And it's a straight shot down a storm sewer into the river. And it can carry all kinds of pollutants and lawn fertilizers and all those types of things. And so it also makes sense that we should be trying to slow water down in the urban landscape. We have a significant 140, I think, different projects that we've funded with cities all across the state, big cities and small cities, where urban conservation work is being done. And we think this is a really important piece that has to be addressed.
Well, and I guess that kind of leads straight into my next question. We talk a lot about the Des Moines River and Raccoon River watersheds, but IDALS is involved in projects across the state, correct? It's not just those two areas.
That's right. So we do have, as part of the strategy, there are targeted watersheds, and there's a handful of those. And so we do pay some extra attention to, as in we will fund local watershed projects or demonstration projects have typically been situated in those targeted watersheds. But while we're doing some targeted work, we also believe that regardless of where you live in the state of Iowa, there's something you can do. And so our cost share is really broadly available. Anybody can sign up. Anybody can call us. Anybody can walk into a USDA office and do work. Any city can. But we do pay special attention to some key watersheds. The Raccoon is one of those. So is the Cedar, by the way. Cedar Rapids and the Cedar Valley watershed area has been an absolute, just a model for how work can get done collaboratively, where Cedar Rapids immediately looked upstream and said, we want to work with farmers. And when you work together, When wastewater and drinking water and farmers and cities work together, you can get a tremendous amount of work done. We should brag more about what's happened in the Cedar Valley. And I'm not saying, hey, look at the work we did. I'm saying, look at the work that was done over there by willing partners, lots of folks that stepped up and said, let's not throw rocks at each other. Let's do things together.
So the nitrate levels in the central Iowa waterways has kind of been what we've been talking about. From your understanding, and I realize this is outside of what your department does, but can you kind of talk a little about what you understand is contributing to those increased levels?
Yeah, so we definitely look at this situation and say, first of all, this is a serious situation. We don't deny that at all in any way, shape, or form. I mean, people's lives are being affected. Waterworks has had to restrict and ban, lawn watering, which is something that folks means a lot to them, right? And here's another thing to stress. Water has been safe. Because of that reduction in the usage, they have been able to deliver a safe drinking water. And too many folks are out there trying to scare people. There's too many folks out there that think the water isn't safe, and that is simply not true. And I also want to say this. I think I've toured waterworks. They have a difficult job to deliver significant quantities to a growing metropolitan area. Des Moines area is growing. It's the fastest growing metropolitan area in the Midwest. We shouldn't want that. We should want a strong, thriving, growing capital city with industry and people and all kinds of development. That's a good thing. But it also means there's increased demand, which means that the services, the utilities have to increase their ability to supply. And I think what you've got here is that we need to have an honest conversation around the fact that there are two parts of this equation. One is what's happening with treatment capacity and a growing demand for water in the metro area, and the fact that we can do more. Why do we have a strategy to begin with? Why are we part of a hypoxia task force working on this overall issue? Is because we recognize that there is a need to reduce nutrient loss in this state. That's not a mystery. We say that right up front. But to apply the blame solely on agriculture and on farmers is simply not accurate. It's not true. Central Iowa Waterworks does something that is going to be inherently a challenge, which is they use water from Des Moines River and Raccoon River. They use surface water, river water as a source water. When you do that, you're going to get a lot of variability. And what you're going to get is variability that's driven by weather. And that's a reality. What we have is a situation where we've had 5 years of drought in the state of Iowa. And then we had a wet, normal spring. And there was a flushing event that occurred where nitrates that have been built up either by natural sources because of our high organic soil that we have at the state that makes us so productive, and or because of some additional nutrients supplied by farmers, the combination of which you do have some nitrates moving through that system. We see that kind of thing happen, a spike, if you will, at times during the spring, and this is a prolonged spike because of, I think, the culmination of the drought years, building up nitrates in the soil, and then a flushing event. And so it's a combination of all those things. And we don't want to play a blame game. I'm not sitting here saying it's all Waterworks' fault or it's somebody's fault for not making those investments, and I'm certainly not going to let folks say it's all agriculture's fault. Let's be fair about that. And no one activity, no one group, no one entity is solely responsible for what's happening, nor are they the only solution to it.
Well, let's talk solutions then. What needs to happen for us to see improvements in, let's say the next decade?
I think I've been clear. There needs to be a steady and strategic investment in utilities and capacity and that sort of thing. And that in the ag landscape, we simply need to see more. And we can't, a lot of folks will say, well, all you need to do is this. Well, it's not one thing, it's many things. And we're going to stick to that, which is that every farm's different. And that means that the solution is different. So what we would like to see, and we think we need to have more of, is just better nutrient management with more tools at your disposal to make that decision about the optimal rate for production. And fertilizer is critically important to growing crops in the state of Iowa. We want to be productive and profitable and drive our economy. We're going to have those things. We also don't want to see those nutrients lost downstream. It's not good economics, and it's certainly not a good environmentally. So we've got an opportunity to do better there. Precision placement, equipment, and digital ag and precision placement is critically important. We needed those infield practices, even more conservation and no-till, but also cover crops we believe are a really important nutrient component. We're at 4 million acres today. We need several million more acres to really get to where we need to be. And that's covering that ground in those times of the year where we're not actively growing a crop. And then we've got to stay focused too on implementing these edge of field infrastructure practices, bioreactors, saturated buffers. We believe wetlands are a key component because they have a 150-year design life. They sit there and they do nitrate reduction every single day that there's water flowing through them. And we think they're a big component of where we need to go. And so we just simply got to scale up, do more, attract more partners, and continue to do the work that we've been doing.
As you look at the next 12 to 18 months, what conservation initiatives are you really excited about?
I'm really pleased with the way that the NFACT tool has played out. And again, this is an example of where we looked and said, Iowa State University Extension had a maximum return to nitrogen. MRTN was a rate, and basically you had one rate for the whole state of Iowa. And it's not good or bad, it just is what it is. And it was kind of an old concept with an old set of information that we were basing it on. And we said, we can do better. And so the ag groups got together along with Iowa State. We went to the legislature and asked for some funding to do this. We worked with farmers across the state, with ag retailers, to do these trials in fields where you went from a zero nitrogen rate to a significant one, and you watched the yield response. And then apply that through modeling and information and soil type mapping and all kinds of things, and considering weather, down to a field by field recommendation. And we're talking about the right thing, which is optimizing yield. Tools like that just help us get even better about the use of nutrients, which are critically important. The other piece that I really am, I think our in-field management practices, cover crops and tillage, I think are two areas where we will continue to see significant interest and increasing usage and activity, and folks are investing in the equipment they need to do that. And then the other is, I really am a big believer in and strongly believe that the wetlands are a must-have, critically important component to what we need to do, especially in the lobe, the north-central part of our state, to intercept tile lines, to do it in a way that's on the least productive ground, do it in a way that can treat thousands of acres, and do it in a way that can also be recreational hubs. They can be very beautiful on the landscape, their habitat. I really think that it's that building out that infrastructure that we need to address water. Those are the components that we're going to really be focused on here in the next couple of years. In addition to all the other things that we're still doing, terraces and all that, right? You still have to do the old standby things as well. But those are the focal areas.
Secretary Naig, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us and kind of talk us through this complicated and important topic.
Yeah, I appreciate the chance to do that. And I want to leave folks with the concept too of let's do more. Let's do more. When you're in the combine this fall and you're looking at a field and you think, what could I do next? Is this the year I'm trying cover crops? Is this the year that we look at a waterway right there? Is this the year that we should look at that buffer strip and a saturated buffer? And please do not hesitate. We want to do more. We want folks to call us and go into the county conservation office, and let's get more done.
Thanks, Secretary Naig. When it comes to a topic like water quality, it always helps to start by asking the experts who are actively involved in pursuing solutions. As you just heard from Secretary Naig, his department has been actively engaged in this area for years, working in a targeted fashion with farmers and other stakeholders to get effective conservation practices on the ground as quickly as possible. Another expert who's been working hard in this field for a number of years is Iowa State University's Dr. Mike Castellano. Spokesman editor Tom Block traveled to Ames earlier this month to sit down for an extensive conversation with Dr. Castellano, and we're bringing you a few of the highlights from that discussion. One question that's certainly on Central Iowans' minds is, why do we hear about high nitrate levels in water some years, like we are in 2025, and not in others? Dr. Castellano says weather is a crucial variable.
We grow crops for 9 months of the year. We have several months when there's no plant demand for nitrogen, and if we don't have plant demand for nitrogen, it's susceptible to loss to the environment. Wet weather obviously exacerbates that. So when we have no crop demand. If we don't have excess precipitation, we lose very little to the environment, as we saw in the past few years, with relatively little nitrate loss, relatively low nitrate concentrations in the spring. This year's a very wet year, and so we've seen higher nitrate levels this spring, although I should say they're very similar to last year, crop year 2024.
We asked Dr. Castellano to elaborate on the idea that nitrate levels in the Des Moines and Raccoon Rivers are actually similar to 2024 and some other previous years, since many news stories on this topic have portrayed 2025 as a far outlier.
So certainly the nitrate levels are very similar to last year, for example, and we've had other years in the past where they've been elevated to similar levels as this year. Detecting long-term trends in nitrate, whether it's up or down, is extremely difficult. And the reason why detecting long-term trends in nitrate levels is very difficult is because in the context of the annual cropping system, it's weather that makes the losses high or low. And so because we have very high year-to-year variability in weather, it makes detecting long-term trends in nitrate loss very difficult. This is why monitoring of not just water quality, but practice implementation, conservation practice implementation, things like denitrification wetlands, cover crop acres, no-till acres, is really important for evaluating progress on our nitrate loss reduction goals.
Further complicating this issue is the increase in springtime precipitation Iowa has seen over time, says Castellano.
Increasing spring precipitation has been occurring for about the last 100 years. This is a finding that's consistent through the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as well as the state monitoring records. Springtime precipitation has increased by about 20% over time, and so has the intensity. Greater springtime precipitation and greater intensity of springtime precipitation causes more nitrate loss.
Dr. Castellano says that in addition to weather, it's also important to remember the nitrogen that exists naturally in Iowa's soil.
Iowa is a leader in crop production for two reasons: favorable climate and the world's best soils. The world's best soils are the world's best soils because they have roughly 10,000 pounds of nitrogen per acre on average in their organic matter.
While the natural nitrogen in Iowa's soil is significant, and weather is the key variable in nitrate levels fluctuating from year to year, some critics of agriculture insist that excess fertilizer application is the primary culprit of nitrate spikes. Dr. Castellano heads up the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative at Iowa State University, and he spent years studying commercial fertilizer use. He says that the claims of excessive commercial fertilizer application just don't match what he's observing in his own research.
The Iowa Nitrogen Initiative demonstrates that Iowa farmers, on average, are applying the right amount of nitrogen fertilizer to produce an economic crop. In crop year 2023, for example, Iowa farmers applied 167 pounds of nitrogen to corn following soybeans and 186 pounds of nitrogen to corn following corn on average. And that's according to the Iowa Nutrient Research and Education Council, which conducts a statistically sound survey. That those numbers actually come from the Iowa State University Center for Survey Statistics and Methodology. So it's a robust sampling of commercial fertilizer application rates in the state. So those numbers come out to about an average of 172 pounds per acre for all the crops in the state, considering the distribution of those two cropping systems. So that 172 pounds of nitrogen per acre compares to the economic optimum nitrogen rate in crop year 2023, according to the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative, of 196 pounds per acre. So if anything, our data suggests farmers may be applying a little bit below the average.
Dr. Castellano also sees real evidence of farmers wanting to become even more efficient with their nitrogen use based on their participation in the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative.
Farmer feedback and participation has been great. So our work would not exist without the important partnership of farmers. Farmers want to improve their nitrogen use efficiency. There's no question about it. And there's no better demonstration of that interest in improving their nitrogen use efficiency than the participation of farmers in our work. We had a goal when we started the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative in 2022 of achieving 400 trials somewhere in the future, maybe 5-10 years it would take us to get there. In year one, we had over 250 trials. In year two, we had over 450 trials. This year, we're going to have close to 600 trials in the state. It's just a remarkable testament to farmers' interest in working with Iowa State University to improve nitrogen fertilizer management on their fields.
As a result of farmer participation, Dr. Castellano and his team have been able to develop increasingly robust tools to help farmers manage their nitrogen even more efficiently moving forward.
We just released the NFACT tool. You can find that on the web. If you Google NFACT, N-F-A-C-T, Iowa State University, it'll take you right to the website. We have two tools at that website. One is a benchmarking tool. It has a transparent picture of all the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative data, hundreds of scientifically robust nitrogen fertilizer rates where the public can see what the optimum nitrogen rate for corn production is in a given year in a given field. The second tool we have at that website is a biophysical process model that takes the data from the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative and it runs it through a quantitative model through millions of scenarios, dozens of weather years, soil types, managements, crop varieties, and it creates probability-based distributions of what the optimum nitrogen fertilizer might be in a particular scenario. To give you an idea of how advanced this tool is, which we just released in February, by the way, the old tool that Iowa State University had was called the Corn Nitrogen Rate Calculator, or the Maximum Return to Nitrogen method, which many of your listeners may be familiar with. It had 4 scenarios in it for farmers to choose from to help inform their nitrogen fertilizer management. Our new NFACT tool has over 21,000 different scenarios that farmers can look through to help inform their nitrogen fertilizer management. Everything from planting date to residual soil nitrogen levels from the previous season, and to springtime and summer weather as well.
While protecting water quality is a complex challenge that's going to take time and sustained effort, Castellano sees farmers making clear progress.
Well, there's no question there have been positive changes. The Iowa Nutrient Research Center's Conservation Practice Tracking Dashboard shows remarkable progress in the implementation of wetlands and cover crops and reduced tillage throughout the state. There's no question that we've been making progress. Do we need to accelerate progress? Yes. Secretary Naig, I've often heard him say, twice the practices, twice as fast for half the cost. And I couldn't agree more. Just as we shouldn't celebrate victory in a few dry years when nitrate levels are low, we shouldn't condemn a lack of progress in wet years when nitrate levels are elevated. Nitrate levels are going to go up and down for the foreseeable future as we make progress towards implementing conservation strategies in the state. And as I mentioned, we've been making continuous improvements in nitrogen fertilizer use efficiency despite an increasingly challenging environment to manage nitrogen fertilizer. And I think all this emphasizes that if we want the high productivity that we enjoy in our agricultural systems in the state, we're going to have to accelerate the implementation of conservation infrastructure practices that we've talked about. Edge of field practices, wetlands, saturated buffers, as well as infield practices like cover crops. This isn't going to happen overnight. Not only will it take time to get those practices on the landscape, but it will also take time to measure those changes in nitrate levels in our streams and rivers because of the strong effect of weather.
Thanks, Dr. Castellano. We'd also like to thank all of the farmers across the state who have been implementing new conservation measures or expanding their existing practices over the years. As we visit your farms and watch the rising number of conservation practices being added to Iowa's landscape through sources like the Iowa Nutrient Research Education Council, We see the positive impact you're having, and we're proud to share your stories. As always, if you'd like to learn more about farmers' conservation progress, you can check out Iowa Farm Bureau's conservation website, which is conservationcountsiowa.com. We also encourage you to visit the website cleanwateriowa.org through the Iowa Department of Ag and the new NFACT nitrogen rate tool that both Secretary Naig and Dr. Mike Castellano mentioned in their interviews. You can also find all of those links down in the notes for this podcast episode. That's all for this edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. We hope you picked up some useful information and that you'll join us for our next episode on August 4th. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to The Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.